Good morning, friend. How are you doing right now?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Listen, all things considered, wish we were talking in like 2 weeks when you had $1 million to your name, but
Hey, me too.
regardless, doesn't really matter. We still get the chance to chat. I mean, we have a lot to get into. Suffice it to say, like you packed a lot in 21 days. I mean, I guess to start, I know the big lesson for you was that, people are not numbers, but let's crunch some numbers for a second because obviously the reason why you're talking with me is because Julie played the idol, nullified a unanimous vote. Her vote sent you home. From what you were scoping out during that day, did you get a sense as to like Julie having an idol because you knew about the amulets? Austin and Drew let you in on it. And then to sort of add on to that, did you debate, okay, whether it's an idol, whether it's a shot in the dark, let me throw my vote onto somebody else so it's not completely unanimous?
Yeah, hindsight being 2020, I obviously should have done that. And if my brain was half functioning, if I had given it more than 2 seconds of thought, I would have. I do wish I had done that, clearly. In terms of like my perception, I mean, Julie and I think we had a pretty good understanding that it was between us. And so we were kind of, she's pointing at me, I'm pointing at her, like that was the relationship. And so at some point I realized that this plan that was supposed to be for a small group of people had kind of leaked out, right? Like Austin kind of letting it leak to D, Drew letting it leak a little bit more to Julie with his, behaviors and mannerisms. The plan actually was not to tell Jake either. And then, Jake was told during the guys, I guess, like brunch, if you want to call it a brunch. So the plan leaked out. I figured Julie knew. What I did not figure, obviously, was that she had an idol. I assumed that the idol got flushed with Sifu because everybody was so convinced for whatever reason that Sifu had an idol. So I thought he left with it because he didn't have his bag at the tribal council he went home at.
Right.
So I thought he left with the idol. My thought was she could play her shot in the dark. And I was a little bit nervous about that, but I remember thinking the odds are so low of it. And my kind of operating alliance at that point being Drew and Austin, we're so focused on loyalty. The moment you say anything bad, it's like your throat's getting slit next. So I was really I was scared. I was scared to go away from what the group was doing and paint an even bigger target on myself. But obviously, if I could go back, I would.
Yeah, well, one of those other things that we used to open up your boot episode was everyone coming back high as a kite about Bruce's boot, and you're like, "You're welcome." I was the one to do it, and in retrospect, it could be looked at as something as, "Oh, Emily did that. She did that." Okay, I mean, talk to me about your feelings in the moment. Was that another feeling of just like high on adrenaline? I need to tell someone about this.
Yeah, lots of boneheaded moves for me, and that's definitely one of them. I want to say that it came from a place of ego, right? Like I was proud of myself for taking off what I thought was a move that other people didn't think was really possible. It was the first time that I felt like I had autonomy in the sense that it was something I was directing. I didn't have that in the post merge world because I never had the numbers really to do what I wanted. So I was proud of myself. And as much as I want to say like, oh, it was ego, I want to come back and brag. I actually think it was kind of insecurity.
Mm.
I remember being kind of insecure that I didn't feel like the jury respected me. I didn't feel like I had autonomy in the game. I was insecure about just how my game was going, and I think that led to me to kind of overcompensate by having that conversation. Talking about Bruce and his I guess snuffing.
Yeah, well, let's talk about said snuffing because obviously you were approached with a plan, at least, to say, like, we're going to go over the top with this plurality. Let's put, however many votes, non-Reba votes we can onto Julie. And again, people are not numbers. I'm sure it was easier said than done to like actually put those people together. Did you give that legitimate thought? Were you thinking through the chances of actually being able to vote out Julie at that Bruce vote?
Yes, but I do wish I had given it more consideration than I did. I remember thinking that I didn't really have what I perceived to be kind of like a functional alliance in the old Bello members. And I thought that if I did vote with them and I betrayed my kind of operating alliance with the Reba members, that I would then paint myself as a big target. I knew, if I take that opportunity and let's say we send home Julie, then I am target number one from both sides, right? Bello's not willing to go to bat for me. And then Reba, I just betrayed them. So they're not willing to go to bat for me. I didn't really consider the fact that having Bruce around that idol still would make him target number one, but he also was sweeping the individual immunity challenges. So there
Mm-hmm.
was a fear that, he could not be targeted as well. So I think what I did was take what I perceived to be the safer route that, got me a little bit further, but didn't actually further my ability to obviously make it to final tribal.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that route because at least from our perception, it really seemed like, especially once Caleb left, like Austin and Drew were in. And obviously that came from the days of New Bello. I mean, talk to me about that dynamic. And I'm sure you were obviously sizing up endgame plans at that moment. Was that your ideal final three, or were you looking at other configurations?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to go to the end with Austin and Drew. That was, I mean, I think if I had it up, in my opinion, and I'm actually sitting there and I can choose who goes to fire, maybe I would choose differently and go with some different people. But I remember thinking I would be fine if that was the final three that I ended up with. I thought that, they played very similar games. So maybe I could make an argument for myself as a little bit more of like an underdog. No, nobody was really there for the Lulu story, and Caleb was, and that was really the only person who saw it. So I remember thinking I can try to explain how I was never safe, right? I never had immunity. I was always in the losing group. I didn't know if that like argument would land with the jury, but I remember thinking that could be a more compelling argument against two people who have been as part of the majority alliance their entire game.
Yeah, so let's get into the Lulu story because you were the last
Oh
of a
no.
dying breed. I mean, your journey is incredible, but we have to start with, the bad news before we get to the good news because it was a wild first few days for you. I mean, how do you look back on that? Because I think the way that Caleb framed it in like episodes 2 or 3 was very much like I know you can't help yourself. Was that the way you came across as well? You said at one point, like, I'm trying to brute force my way through this game. Talk to me about that initial approach.
Yeah, I really wish that I could explain my behavior better than I can. I will say it was not calculated. There are some people who are like, well, this was a choice by him. Like, it really wasn't. It was, Caleb was right to say I couldn't help myself. You see it, I have very loose lips and I kind of say whatever's on my mind without really thinking first, especially in a stressful scenario. And going out there, it was just this whole experience was so extreme. I really wasn't doing a good job of curbing some of like my harsher qualities. And Caleb helped me just kind of put my head back on my shoulders because I was out of my element. I was just so in my head for those first few days. And Caleb kind of brought me back down to earth. And I will be forever incredibly grateful for that because my survivor experience is so different without him.
Yeah, talk to me about that feeling because coming from the most unlikely of places, right? The very guy that you say out of desperation, yeah, we should probably go for him. He ends up being someone to teach you. I wouldn't even say teach you. I think just like show you a part of yourself that you didn't realize you could utilize in the game, but you are granted the second life. I think even you seem to know you were pretty dead to rights going into that tribal council. So when Hannah ends up leaving and you emerge, is there like an immediate game plan in mind? How did you approach those next few days knowing like, listen, it wasn't me this time. It could be me next time.
Yeah, I'll provide some context. So that first vote, my logic was, I have eyes. I can see Lulu versus Reba and Bella. We're going to keep losing. And so I went to like Brandon and my argument was kind of like, it's one of us, right? We lose. One of us is going. I'm weird and aggressive, and you had the issue with the barge, so we're the easy targets. And if you're not first, then you're second. And if I'm not first, then I'm second. And then I also went to Hannah, and I kind of made that same argument, because she was obviously struggling as well, and it was kind of like well, what we should do is just accept the fact that we're going to lose, and just pray for a swap or a merge or something, and get the stronger threats out now and try to float because I thought my days were numbered. Caleb, his social game is incredible because you say it was like a last ditch effort to come in and kind of target him. I had like 5 or 6 pages in my Ponderosa pre-journal dedicated to how much I hated Caleb because he's so social. He's bopping around. He's trying to break all the rules. And I'm like a very strict rule follower. And I was like, who is this guy? It's too much. So the fact that he was able to put aside what was my kind of like immediate negativity and say like, okay, I know she said my name, but I'm logical. I see the opportunity that exists with this relationship and take that. I mean, so much props to him. But yeah, I never thought I was coming back from that first tribal council. So when he got back from tribal council, I was like, I realized that I had to live with these people for more days. I was like, oh, I'm so screwed.
Well, then you end up coming to like a pretty good position of power, I would say, even as immediate as the Sabaya vote, and then even on New Bello. And what's so interesting is that when the swap and the merge, you kind of have to like remake a first impression because the impression everyone has of you is what you did on the mat. And even Drew vocalizes that. So what was that experience like for you of, yes, undergoing this personal growth and at the same time realizing like, oh no, I have to show people again, like I'm not that Emily from day one.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting. I will say I learned a lot. So Caleb obviously helped me, but one of the big things, like my immediate reaction on Lulu, everybody kind of clicked on Lulu except for me. And there was really like I felt the feeling of just being like, not that everybody hated me, but like being the least liked group. So when I made that swap to Bello, and actually the vibes were totally different. You know, when you just kind of like click with people, everybody was talking about like anxiety and like all this stuff that I really kind of understood a bit more. So it was a lot easier for me to immediately kind of like get along with some of the new Bello members than it was on Lulu, but also taken from the fact that I knew the more harsh qualities of myself, I had to just like keep my mouth shut a bit more, let other people like be open. Like Lulu was so open. Everybody was just so like communicative and like genuine and sharing all these stories. And I was like reserved and scared to like come out of my shell. So when I, had the opportunity to switch to Nubella, I was like, okay, well, let's tell stories, right? Talk about my life a little bit more, talk about my boyfriend, like do all that stuff so they can actually get to know me.
Yeah, so let's sort of talk more about this journey because you sort of recapped it last night when you were on the journey itself. That this is obviously something that's very stark for you. Again, I'll say at the same time, it did feel like, you were just more so bringing out qualities that you already had. But, you did leave the game last night being like, I learned things that I was going to take back with me. Yes, the first words we heard you say was, if I'm not winning, vote me out first. I would imagine now you're sort of like, I'm glad I got those 21 days to obviously bring a lot more home.
Yeah, my logic was I really don't need to starve on an island for a month, right? Like
Hmm.
I don't need to leave work. I don't need to do any of this. I won $1 million. If I can't get $1 million, then I'd really just rather go back to my everyday life. And to a certain extent, I still feel that way. But I never expected to have like the relationships, the journey. Like it doesn't feel that long, and it really isn't. But the experience is so extreme that it does change you. And I will be forever grateful that I had this opportunity. Again, if I could go back now, knowing that I was not the winner of Survivor, if I could go back and do it all again, knowing I would still lose, I would do it.
Well, and I think it's also obviously tough that you lost out, but as you talked about in your final words, like almost better to go out as like, well, I was the big threat that, got two people voted out with idols in their pockets and, won this big individual reward challenge. Like it seemed like you had surprised yourself in a number of ways, at least from my perception, in your last few days in the game. And so that's also something else you're kind of taking with you as well.
Yeah, I love to set expectations low, and I inadvertently put the bar on the floor. So anything I did in the game of Survivor, everyone was like, "Wow, that's incredible! Look at her, she's great." And I think the editing was very generous in that regard. But yeah, my Survivor experience was so different than I expected, and I made a lot of mistakes. I won't lie, but one of the things that I'm most proud of, which is so silly, but winning that reward challenge, I never thought I would win anything. I was felt like really incompetent and compared to like everybody else who was playing. So that was a great moment, even though I was, then booted at the next episode.
So obviously last episode, and there's the deleted scene from this episode, I'm not sure if you saw, but there was talk about, your relationship with your decades long partner. And listen, I don't obviously want to pry too much, but that was another thing that you said, like, this is something I didn't know I'd be thinking about, and I'm coming home with it. I mean, how did you sort of approach that? Because you're also coming home to literally a new home and a new context to your relationship.
Yeah, it's silly when I'm crying about it while I'm drinking my sangria, and I recognize that, but it really
To be
was,
honest, people were crying over their sangria and for very different reasons as well. So it's relatable.
I will say, I think the women went through like 4 or 5 bottles of wine that night. We should have gone in a women's montage because we had way more fun than the guys did. So, that's what they should have aired. But yeah, I had that realization. And it was really just like what matters to me in life, right? Because all these things that I thought were really important that defined me, I wasn't talking about them to other people. I wasn't talking about like, oh, my travels, my school, my career, whatever. I was talking about my boyfriend the entire time. And I was really afraid that, Eric, my boyfriend, would have resentment towards me for taking this. He doesn't watch Survivor. He's not a fan of the show. So I was taking time away from us, like just for myself, in a really selfish move that would leave him alone to do something really momentous, our first home together. And obviously he was not as resentful as I was afraid he was going to be. He's been incredibly kind. But when I came back and I told him, hey, so I went on Survivor and I didn't win the $1 million, but I may have a new outlook on our relationship, he got a good chuckle from it.
Last thing I got to ask is your reaction to the fan reaction. I know that obviously, you certainly came into this not as aware as like how deep the community can be. And I know you're not like incredibly plugged in, but I'm sure even you have like seen the financial analyst Emily Flippen memes and have heard just the immense amount of support that has garnered for you. And it must be so interesting for you, not only having to like see your journey again from a third person perspective, but seeing other people react alongside you. Talk to me a bit about what that journey has been like for you with the fandom, who essentially, I'll go so far as to say, like, fell in love with you over the past 11 weeks.
Honestly, it's weird and it's kind of jarring. As you mentioned, I did not really know the Survivor community existed when I applied and went on the show. So like pre-game press, didn't know that was a thing. Didn't know this was a thing. Didn't know Reddit existed, right? Didn't know any of this, that anybody was still really watching Survivor. So I think that's part of the reason why I came out there and was willing to be so um, aggressive initially, was because I didn't realize the scale, I think, of what I was doing. And that change in reaction from the first episode to today, it's I appreciate the support. I don't want to take it for granted, because I think everybody kind of deserves it. And obviously with my airtime and my edits, with my little growth arc, like that, I got way more of it than some people did. But it is just two levels of extreme, right? That I just, yeah, I don't know how to process it, if I'm honest. I want to say I'm flattered, but in reality is it's weird as hell, and nobody really knows how to handle it.
I mean, weird as hell is a great way to describe just like this entire experience on island, off island. That being said, like, you were part of it, and I will join the throng in saying like how thrilled I was to get to see it happen. I mean, getting to talk with you back in April to now, it's been a wild several months in so many ways, but you were you out there, and that is something we are so incredibly grateful for. And I think what you've been experiencing is like how relatable your story has been to so many people. I've seen so many people be like, I would probably go out there and like do the same thing. And I think at the end of the day, I think being yourself out there, warts and all, has allowed you to leave the game with very few regrets. And I think that's the end all be all at the end of the day, and a new home and a new sense of life to boot. So, I mean, thank you. Sincerely, thank you. This was such a pleasure to always talk with you before, during, after, and to just watch everything unfold over the past 11 weeks.
That is so kind of you to say that. And thank you. I mean, again, the whole experience has been crazy, and I appreciate the support. And I have the best, 17 castmates a girl could ask for. Genuinely, they have made this experience, they have just made the experience for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wish you and Eric and the new house nothing but the best. And I cannot wait to
Thank
see
you.
what happens next. The mark is looking good for you, Emily.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
All right. Thank you so much again. Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
You
Bye.
too.